67 years old, and I've just started to learn to speak my voice as one of the quiet ones and step into my true power. It's taken me all this time, well, not quite all this time. I called the subtitle Daring to Blossom because that's the name of my business, is Dare to Blossom, and that's what I truly started to do now in my life and what I help other people to do. This is about how I got there. And I think the first thing I wanted to say was about power. It's a lot of the conversations I've had with people, especially women, but many men too, over the last few years, is how we reject our own power and reject the idea of power. And that's because we are stuck in that old image of power over others, control, domination, fear. What we want, all of us as humanity, I believe, is the other sort of power that's being demonstrated here by Gertrude's movement, which is power with others, collaboration, and together we rise through our own efforts with everybody else. So that's what I've been thinking about and talking about for the last few years. So just to tell a little of my story to illustrate it, I was always the quiet little girl when I was a child. I think we all start off being actually not quiet. We can tell people what we need by screaming and shouting and laughing and gurgling sometimes. But I was always the quiet one, and I enjoyed that. I like being a quiet one. And it's only a few years ago I learned why that is. Lots of people have mentioned neurodiversity today, and that's another element of it, is the range of different ways of being between introversion and extroversion. And I know I'm on the introversion side of that scale. And I learned that what that really means for me is that when I need to recharge my energy, I need to be quiet. I need to go away by myself. That's why you might see me disappear quite often during this conference and just have 2 minutes even outside or with a book, with nature. And that's how I regain my energy. Whereas for other people who are more on the extrovert end of that scale, would love being with people to recharge, and that buzz and the excitement and playing team sports, all those things. And I love that too, as long as I've got an escape route. I need an escape route. So my room down there is a beautiful situation. So I think that's what I've learned about how to appreciate my own quietness and to know it has value, because that was the other part of it. Again, somebody mentioned highly sensitive people, of which I'm also one. How much loss that is to the world in business and in society in general if those people aren't valued and their talents used. The same with those of us who are introverts and don't speak up. So in the world of work, I wouldn't speak up in meetings because I didn't get through my thought processes quick enough to form a sentence before somebody else had jumped in and said their view, which might be the same as mine, but that meant my voice wasn't heard. So I've got a few family photos, some more family photos to illustrate. So teenagers and 20s, one of the things I went through was bullying at school. So the black and white picture on the left there was my first passport photograph. I remembered having a conversation with a very wise young English teacher on a school trip when we went to France. And I must have been talking to her about the bullying, I don't remember that, but she said to me, "You do know why they bully you, don't you? They're jealous of you." And I said, "No, they're not jealous of me, I'm quiet. They're all successful and popular and all those things." I said, "No, you're growing up faster than them." Actually, I was very self-contained at that age. She said, "You've got grace, you're becoming a beautiful young woman, they're jealous." And that helped me understand them a little bit. It was still a puzzle to me at 13, whatever age I was. And some of those pictures, the one in the middle was my first visit to New Zealand. And the picture's reversed, I couldn't get it right, but you may recognise at Rotorua. My cousins live there, and I was visiting my sister who lives near Christchurch, where I'm staying today. Not today, but on this visit. And she remembers me as a very quiet young teenage girl who wouldn't do anything or get involved with things. And again, that's because she's more on the extrovert scale, I think, and she didn't understand me at the time. So when she sees this, she'll be interested in my comments. So my wake-up call in 1994 was a diagnosis of cervical cancer. And the first thing I wanted to know was to share other women's stories who'd been through that experience. I couldn't find that support anywhere. So after I'd made a recovery, which took me a long time, my main enduring issue now still is chronic pain, which I suffer from intermittently now, thank goodness, not all the time. But that was something I needed support with myself and didn't get then. So a few years later I compiled a book of women's stories, which I published under the title of Flying in the Face of Fear, which again has tapped into so many people's stories today, have talked about that concept. And that was my first step into helping other women through sharing our stories. So I'm very proud of that. The photograph is the one that was done by the local press for publicity. Then skipping ahead to when I started my business, which I called Dare to Blossom, this was the quote that inspired that. I bought a card which is still on my cork board at home, very faded now, and many of you will be aware or familiar with this quote. And then the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. And for some reason that converted in my mind to Dare to Blossom. You know, I'm going to dare myself to do this thing, whatever the next thing was. And it's been a continual challenge as a business name, because people say to me when I give them my card, well, have you? Have you dared to blossom? So that's why I slightly change it when I'm talking to daring to blossom. It's a continuing process. So for my next however many years, which I tend to live a long and blossoming life, so for my next stage in life I can continue that. So I've done some more books. I don't want to dwell on them about my story, but they were using my experiences. So I've done some coaching books. The middle ones are to do with a little pack of cards I use as inspiration cards for people, which are simply words and colours, and they're powerful little tools that prompt us to think differently. So over the last few years, as I said, I've been finding my voice. I've been stepping up and taking part in interviews. I've been a participating author in a number of books, all sorts of different ways of stories, telling in different ways about what I've been through and experiences I've had. The left-hand one was published 2 years ago, I think now, and it was by a photographer. She specialised in photography, and she did her degree project on women of spirit. Susie Mackey, some of you may know of her. And she's compiled 2 books now, working on the third, which are women's stories illustrated with her professional portraits that she does. So I was in part of that book. And the centre one is probably the first talk to a big audience I've done. I've done lots of workshops. I run workshops. I'm doing one tomorrow if anybody's interested more in what I do. But that was the first big talk I gave, and that was 2 years ago on my birthday, 2 years ago. And that shawl I'm wearing, which doesn't look particularly impressive in that photograph, but it was knitted specially for me by a very skilled craftswoman called Amy Palco in Edinburgh in Scotland. And it was a special piece that was knitted with special spiritual implications for me, which she did for me, and I bought for myself for my 65th birthday, which is around that time. And then the final one was earlier this year. Somebody anonymously nominated for our local Women's Awards, till the Venus Awards, in the Lifetime Achievement category. And that was the final ceremony, and I got to the last 3 people in that category. So I was very proud of that, and very unaccustomed to being recognised in that way, because I never expected to get nominated for an award. But going back to the powerful voice and the quiet ones, who here would see themselves as an extrovert? Quite a few people. How about being an introvert? If you want to be out, maybe you don't. In between, perhaps, most of us are sort of in between, yeah. And I think the research is rather vague, because it can't be otherwise, I think. But up to 50% of the population of most countries would see themselves as introverts, so that is a huge loss if those people aren't being enabled to develop their true talents and their way of being in the world and having that recognised. That's just the final thing I wanted to say, was that each of us needs to be entitled to be ourselves in our true ways. It's that authentic fire. It's not going to our graves with our songs unsung, as one of the saying goes. And I call it dancing in the flow of life. That's a piece of my artwork that I play with at home. And I just want everybody to be able to feel, however they are in the world, that they can be simply who we are and find your true voice and your powerful voice. So that's me. Thank you.